Hello, and welcome to the Faculty of Engineering's Graduate Studies Ask Me Anything event for the Department of Management Sciences. My name is Sarah Landy, and I'm the Manager of Graduate Operations within the Faculty of Engineering, and I will be your host for today's event. During today's event, we will be hearing from faculty, current students, and admission experts from the Department of Management Sciences. We encourage you to use the Q&A button within your webinar screen to submit any questions you may have about graduate programs from our panelists. You can also upvote any questions that you are particularly interested in hearing about. Within the chat, my colleagues Catherine and Jen will be answering questions you have as well. During the second half of the event, we will have a live Q&A session using questions that were pre-submitted as well as questions that are asked live in the chat. So let's get started. I'd like to hand it over to our panelists now, so please welcome Associate Chair Rob Dumering for the Department of Management Sciences.
Thanks, Sarah. So my name is Rob Dumering. I'm the Associate Chair of Graduate Studies in Department of Management Sciences. Also on the panel today, we have two of my colleagues, Professor Sibel Aloumer-Alev and Professor Lucas Golab, and also two graduate students, Alia Al-Nagar and Jordan Nickel. So I'd like to start by giving a little bit of information about our department. Basically, the Department of Management Sciences, Department of Management Sciences, oh, somebody put some automation on this thing. We'll see if I can get it to stop. Department of Management Sciences consists of three broad areas of work. We've got a group called that does work in operations research, where they deal with topics like healthcare operations management, logistics and supply chain management, revenue management, pricing, data analytics, these sorts of topics, optimization. We also have a group that deals with information systems and information technology. They specialize in areas like data science, data analytics, human-computer interaction, search engines, natural language processing, and related topics. Then there's a group of which I'm also a part that deals with technology and innovation management. We deal with topics related to organizational behavior, human behavior in organizations, management of innovation, as well as topics related to the economics of innovation. Now we have graduate programs of various sorts. We have both coursework and research-based programs. At the master's level, we have a coursework program called the Masters of Management Sciences, the MMSC, and it comes in various versions. We have a regular program, which normally is an on-campus program, although now under the COVID situation, it's of course being offered online. And then we also have a regular program that has always been online. So we have two versions of our online program at the moment. The coursework program takes roughly about 1 year to complete full-time, so 3 of our 4-month terms. Typically, students would start in the fall and finish in August. Part-time options are available as well that could take 2 to 3 years to complete. There's also within the regular on-campus program, there's a co-op option, which I'll say something about in a minute, and an option to do a so-called graduate diploma in data analytics. Our online program is the same setup in terms of coursework, but it's only offered on a part-time basis. It takes about 2 to 3 years to complete and does not offer the co-op or GDDA options. Our research-based programs include the Masters of Applied Science, the MASC, and the PhD. They tend to emphasize research, so that most of the work is related to completing a thesis, but you also complete 4 courses. The master's program takes typically about 2 years to complete on a full-time basis or 3 or more years part-time. There is a small number of students who also do a co-op option within the MASC. And the PhD is very similar, although tends to take a little longer because you're doing a more substantial piece of research. In terms of career possibilities, all of our programs, our graduates Many of them end up in industry or running startups. Of course, the research programs also emphasize careers in research, either with government or private sector, or in academia, working eventually as a university professor. This graduate diploma in data analytics, the so-called GDDA, is an option within the MMSc program. So students who are doing the MMSc, you take 4 required core courses, but then you have 4 elective courses as well. And if you select a specific set that I've listed here that deal with topics like big data analytics, operations analytics, statistics, as well as 1 additional GDDA elective, you can get an extra designation, graduate diploma in data analytics. That's so far available only within our regular MMSc program, although we are considering adding it to our online MMSc program as well. Full-time master's students can follow a co-op option as well. This program is not something you would apply directly to, so you would apply after you've been admitted into either the MMSc or the MASc, after the first term or at the end of your first semester. And we evaluate admission based on your performance in the first term courses. So typically we need about an 85 average to get into co-op. And if you're an MASc student, you also need approval of your thesis supervisor. You also need to have a good command of the English language. And your work term requirements are basically 2 4-month work terms, as well as 2 work reports that you would complete. Now, I want to pass it over to a couple of my colleagues to say something about their particular area of research. So I'll start with Sibel Alumer-Alev.
Hello. Thank you, Rob. I'm a faculty whose research is in operations research. So what does OR operations research mean? Let me start with that perhaps. OR is a discipline that deals with the application of advanced analytical methods to help make better decisions. Actually, it's a rational, structured, and systems approach to problem solving. It is also known as management science, operational research, sometimes analytics, decision sciences, and also parts of industrial engineering discipline involves operations research. So within operations research, my expertise is on actually optimization, and in particular on logistics, network design, supply chain, and logistics. And so here I listed a couple of current research topics that are being done in our department. So the first few are actually the topics that I work with my PhD students. My expertise is not directly on healthcare, but at this time and age, healthcare analytics is becoming more and more important, especially in this COVID era. So we are now modeling some infectious disease modeling using some analytical methods, including the location of testing centers, their capacities of the COVID disease. And we have also worked on some other infectious disease that we see in a hospital, MRSA, which is an antibiotic resistant disease. So another topic that I'm currently working on is about hub location problems. So how do we design hub networks in the most efficient way to exploit economies of scale and take advantage from shipment consolidation as much as possible? So we see hubs in various networks, like in transportation networks or airline passenger transportation, or in cargo delivery, in courier networks, we see lots of hubs. Another research topic that I'm currently working on is charging infrastructure design for electric vehicles. So there are lots of incentives to use electrical vehicles these days, and what are the optimal locations for these charging stations, and how are these vehicles should be routed, both for commercial vehicles or some, for example, newly launched electric trucks. How should they be routed, and what is the most efficient way of using these vehicles? So I also listed some other topics that are relevant in OR. For example, there's a study on a strategic network design for parcel delivery with drones. Drones is a new emerging technology too, and some companies, including Amazon, is trying to integrate drones into their last mile delivery. There are studies on green supply chain network design. How can we make our supply chain more green in the way that more eco-friendly with less environmental impact, especially carbon dioxide emissions? And also there are lots of studies, research that we do with data-driven models. One example is data-driven modeling and optimization of the order consolidation problem, for example, in e-warehousing. And also we have some data-driven optimization problems that are being solved in healthcare every day, basically. For example, to support the scheduling of patients so that we have a certain wait time target. And there are studies that I know my colleagues work on scheduling MRI machines. And also there are colleagues in our department working on radiotherapy planning, how to make it more robust and resilient. So these are the topics that I listed as a few examples of research topics in OR. But of course, we are open to other topics, other interesting emerging topics for our research. I think that's it from me now. I'll be welcome to have any questions in OR.
Okay, thanks, Sibel. All right, next up we have Professor Lukasz Golub, who is a researcher in information systems.
Okay, so here's a brief overview of the research interests of our faculty members in information systems and data analytics. So many of us work on data systems and data tools of some kind. These include tools to explore data, tools to characterize data quality to make sure that the data are suitable for further analysis, deep learning tools for classification, improvements to search engines, blockchains and cryptocurrencies, as well as distributed and cloud computing systems. We also work on data-driven methods that can be used to solve real-life problems in various applications. These include sustainability, public health, education, and transportation. One particular area of interest of several of our IAS faculty members is natural language processing and text analytics. And this includes social media mining as well as language translation, for example, simplifying or paraphrasing text. And finally, several of our IAS faculty members are interested in human-computer interaction and user interface design.
Okay, thank you very much, Lukasz. Okay, now I'll say a little bit about the area of work that I'm involved in, which we call in our department management of technology. It's kind of an umbrella term that includes anything from decision-making by people, human behavior in organizations, to the level of kind of economic level of analysis of how innovation and entrepreneurship might impact the economy. So studies are really quite wide-ranging with all sorts of different methodologies. Myself and a few others do a fair bit of field study work, so perhaps interview studies of specific technical situations, such as product design, development studies, project management. I've done some work on startups and how teams that are starting new ventures interact with one another to develop new products, establish themselves as organizations. We also have some colleagues that engage in experimental work, myself included, on various topics. So in particular, topics like behavioral decision-making, where rather than the kind of more normative analytical ways of making decisions that Sibel spoke about in operations research, we tend to emphasize more the human processes involved in decision-making, the kind of biases and heuristics that people use when they make decisions themselves. Problem solving in groups and individuals, studies of communication. Then economics, we have a few economists who do typically analysis of large scale data sets from various economic data related to the effects of innovation and entrepreneurship and related topics. Then there's mix of studies related to social aspects of technical systems. Now this is quite a general area, Myself, I've done some work such as recently a student investigating how to use information algorithms to filter out medical misinformation in information retrieval. So this kind of overlaps with some of the work that Lukasz was talking about in information systems, and also overlapping with HCI area, human computer interaction. I have a student who's interested in working on effects of technology design on collaboration. So kind of evaluating different properties of technology to support group collaboration. And then there's a few other colleagues that are involved in topics related to organization design, organizational change. So quite a range of topics that from the level of individuals up to almost macroeconomic levels of economy and society. Okay, now I'd like to pass the speaker over to two of our graduate students, Alia Al-Nagar, sorry, I skipped the slide there, and Jordan Nickel. Alia is a PhD student and Jordan is an MASc student.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Rob. As Rob mentioned, my name is Jordan Nickel, and I am a Master's of Applied Science student in the Department of Management Sciences. My research is focused on characterizing how designers navigate trade-offs in practice, which falls under the umbrella of the management of technology. I also completed my undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering at the University of Waterloo. I didn't go directly into research, but instead detoured for a stint in industry first and then started a coursework master's before I realized, with the advice of some of the professors I kept in contact with from my undergrad, that research would allow me to have the positive impact on the world I was looking for. So I think the biggest difference I've noticed in the transition from undergraduate studies to my graduate degree is the level of personal responsibility. I found that at the graduate level, I'm responsible for setting my own goals and charting the path to meet those goals. This includes my research goals, my coursework goals, my personal and professional development goals, all of those sort of things. And if you're a driven and self-motivated individual, this can be quite liberating to have such freedom, but you do need to be diligent about keeping yourself accountable. Your supervisors, if you have them, are there to provide advice, insight, and guidance on which goals to set and how you plan to attain them. But at the end of the day, you're in charge of charting your own course. That's not to discount the impact of your supervisors, though, since in my experience, they've been incredibly supportive, helping me figure out what goals to set and how you plan to attain them, providing career advice, and pushing me to produce the very best work I'm capable of. I'd also like to talk a little bit about student life at the University of Waterloo, particularly as a grad student, since I've been on campus for nearly 6 years now, and the University of Waterloo has changed a ton in that time. They're investing heavily in the student life, including the recent addition of the field house, new buildings with tons of labs and student spaces, and they're upgrading the student life center and gym, if you're not a student already and are unaware of that. If you're a coursework master's, you'll probably find yourself using these study spaces quite a bit, as I did. But as a research student, a lot of your work will be either typically done in your office or in a lab or in the field. The offices given to research students are typically shared, and your office mates can be valuable supports during your degree and possibly even great friends. And however, given the current situation with coronavirus, as some of the others mentioned, a lot of students are working remotely now, including myself. Working and researching from home is a change, but at the end of the day, a lot of a graduate student's work can be done remotely. And what can't, the university is working to support us on. I'd like to pass it over to Aaliyah now to discuss a bit about how you choose a research topic and a supervisor.
Hello, my name is Elia. I'm a PhD candidate at the Department of Management Sciences. My research focuses on applying operations research techniques to design efficient last mile delivery solutions that integrate concepts from the sharing economy. I personally chose management sciences at Waterloo because it has a strong operations research program and excellent researchers who produce high quality research. Also, many professors have strong industry contacts and work in collaborative research with companies. During my master's and PhD at Waterloo, I've had the chance to work on 3 collaborative industry projects. And speaking of how do you choose a supervisor or someone to work with, first, once you pick the specialization that you're interested in, you could see the faculty who work in this area and maybe take a look at some of their papers to get an idea of the type of work they do. I then recommend that you make a list of professors you want to work with in order of preference. If you have a scholarship, that of course puts you at an advantage. But if you're looking for a research assistantship from your advisor, then your options would be limited to those who can provide funding, of course. So in this case, when you approach supervisors, you really want to try to stand out. And one way to do that is to read some of their published work and possibly mention one study that you found particularly interesting and would like to pursue somewhat similar area of research. You also want to show them how your experience makes you a good fit for this type of work that you're interested in. And once you have a supervisor and you're picking your research topic, of course, it's a great idea to have initiative and to try to think of a research area yourself. But you also want to keep in mind that your advisor has more experience in judging the potential contribution of your idea. So for example, an idea could be too simple to make a significant scientific contribution, or too broad and needs to be narrowed down for you to complete your degree on time. In any case, I recommend having open conversations with your supervisor so that you could understand how to define a research scope and identify promising research directions. I think that's it for me.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jordan and Alia. Very, very helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about admissions and funding, and then we'll end the presentation with some open question period. So first of all, admissions. We have here the minimum requirements for getting into various programs in our department. Basically, grades are considered, of course, and we do have minimums. In practice, most people who get in are well above the minimum. So these are kind of the bottom line cutoffs, but generally speaking, people have higher grades than this. And these are, of course, translation. These would be in a Canadian context, percentage grades, but many countries, of course, use different grading schemes, and we have ways of translating from different countries into the Canadian scheme. As Alia and Jordan mentioned, if you're doing research, you need a supervisor. So MMSc students who do only courses, they don't require a supervisor. MASc and PhD certainly do. And to get a supervisor, there's really two important criteria. One is the topic of interest. So you need to find someone who's working on problems that you find interesting as a student, and hopefully you can find a topic that you both get quite interested in and work very hard towards solving the problem. But practically speaking, you'll also need funding. So MASc and PhD students are supported financially by the university, and most of that funding comes from the supervisor's own research budget. So you really need someone who's willing to kind of invest in you, not only their time, but also some of their research funding. Generally speaking, our department requires some minimum level of quantitative background. Most of our students have some kind of a technical prior studies, whether it's engineering or mathematics or computer science, but it's not exclusively the case. We'd certainly admit each year students with other kinds of backgrounds as well, but generally you would need some minimum level of quantitative background. And of course, English language proficiency. If you're an international student or your prior studies were not at an English speaking university, we expect you to meet minimum standards on English tests. Now, tuition, there's a lot of information here, but hopefully you can find the slides afterwards or click on this website link. This is our current tuition rates. They range quite a bit. So you can see that full-time Canadian students, part-time Canadian students certainly pay less than international students. Canadian student funding is subsidized by the government, so the fees that students pay are less. Most of these fees are on a term-by-term basis. Our MSci online fees are paid course by course. But you can see for a research student, MASc, PhD, you're talking, if you're Canadian, about $2,200, $22.5 plus some incidental fees, so about almost $3,000 per term. term is 4 months, so 3 times that per year. So that's about $9,000 a year. Whereas if you're a PhD or an MASC from an international location, you're paying quite a bit more than that, $7,200 per term plus about $700 in incidental fees. So 3 times that is quite a bit more. MMSC students pay more than that. So for coursework students, you're paying a little bit more, $2,700 per term for Canadians and permanent residents, $13,000 per term for international. If you're a co-op student, there's some additional fees on a per term basis during your work terms. I'll leave those out there. We can bring it back if you have questions later if you're curious about the details. Now, as I said, students in research programs get some funding from the university. So you have to pay your fees, but we also pay you. So it's kind of a money flowing both directions. All MASC students receive a minimum guaranteed funding of $18,000 per year. And in our department, at least, international students also get $7,500 top up on top of that. Some of it paid by the university, some of it paid by our department. PhD students, $24,000 roughly per year minimum. And if you're an international student, you get an extra almost $15,000. So overall, your total annual income is not too bad, covers your tuition, leaves you some money to live on, not live well perhaps, but certainly gives you some money. We do have some additional ways of getting money. Teaching assistantships are offered on an employment basis, term by term. They pay about $4,400 per term and require you to work 10 hours a week. These are optional. You would apply each term and you could do one every 3 terms if you can continue to, if you can fit that into your research program. Most students do at least 1 or 2 of those per year if they're MASC or PhD students. We also have some TA positions available for MMSC students. So there is quite a bit of possibility to do TA work. Average annual funding, roughly about $28,000 minimum for MASC students, given all of the different sources, and about $38,000. These are all, of course, Canadian dollars for PhD students. Now, in addition to the minimum funding that we mentioned, there are some additional funding sources available. We have within engineering at the university, we have some admission type awards. They range from admission or from entrance scholarships of about $5,000 each, lots of those available for top students. Also some much more funded, larger grants, scholarships, fellowships on a smaller competitive basis. Ranging from $25,000 to $40,000, and some special awards for students working in areas like advanced manufacturing of a similar amounts. Now those are awarded primarily based on your incoming grades, your prior studies. You don't have to submit special applications for them. We simply review your admission application, and the top students are assigned, to receive some of these scholarships. So it doesn't necessarily come on top of what I said in the previous slide. It could replace the minimum funding, but it would be a minimum then at a higher level, because you're getting it not just the minimum 18,000. If you get one of these scholarships, you could be getting 25 or 40, for instance. There are also various external scholarships. Now, most of these showing here are strictly for Canadians, although some international students can get Ontario graduate scholarships as well. But most of these are for Canadians. NSERC is a Natural Science Engineering Research Council. We've just passed the deadline for applying for that, but there are other ones still coming. If you're a master's student, there's a Canadian graduate scholarship for master's students. Applications due December 1st. And as you enter the program, we kind of go through on an annual basis these scholarship application cycle, and encourage our research students especially to apply for these. How to apply? Most of it is laid out pretty well on our website, both the department website as well as the Faculty of Engineering graduate office websites. You can find pointers there. But basically, if you're a research student, for sure, you should start by exploring faculty members and their research interests, contacting supervisors who you might be interested to work with. See if they're interested in the kind of things you are interested in, see if they have research funding available. If you're an MMSC, interested in our MMSC programs, the coursework programs, you don't have to contact supervisors. You don't need a supervisor. So it's just a matter of evaluating whether you feel there's a good fit with our program. Make sure you complete all your documentation. The deadlines for most admissions are February 1st is the application deadline. And so lots of paperwork comes in the last week of January. So make sure you kind of get a head start so you're not rushing to pull transcripts from your former university. Sometimes they can be hard to get. Make sure all the documents are there, submit them and upload them, and we'll evaluate them. I think that's about it for the introduction. And now we'd like to turn it over to you for any of your questions.
Great, thank you very much to all of our panelists. That was wonderful information. So we're going to begin the Q&A session, as Rob said. So as a reminder, we'd like you to continue to submit your questions using the question and answer button within your webinar screen and upvote any questions you are particularly interested in. So for our first question, I'm going to direct it to our two graduate student panelists. So maybe we'll start with Aaliyah and then Jordan. And they're asking what a typical day in the life of a PhD or MASC student is like.
So I think this depends really in what phase of your PhD you're in. So typically in the beginning, you'll have to take courses and you won't be spending a lot of time on research. But afterwards, like once you're done with the courses, the focus will be more on research. So it's typically you would go, like I personally like to work, a typical day 9 to 5, and most of it is in my lab or my office. And you would like just socialize with the people in your lab or work group, and you take like a lunch break. But basically you manage your own time and manage your own research topic, and you would meet with your supervisors as needed. So I guess that's the typical for a PhD student.
Yeah, and the master's is quite similar. You'll probably end up taking courses in more of your terms than you would as a PhD student. But yeah, you do coursework a little bit of the day. And then depending where you are on your thesis, you'll either be doing a lot of literature review or background research, or you'll be setting up your studies and meeting with your supervisors to set that up, or you'll be executing your studies. So right now I'm in the middle of setting up the studies. I spend a lot of time in meetings with my supervisors, figuring out exactly the details of how we want to meet our research goals. But in the future, I might be taking calls at odd hours to do interviews with people all over the world if my research needs that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, both of you. Our next live question is a pretty specific question. Rob, you had touched on the requirements for admission into the MASC and MMSC programs. And this particular prospective student is wondering if an undergraduate degree in science and business counts as a relevant degree for admission.
Yeah, we would certainly accept somebody with science and business background. It would depend on the specific courses perhaps, but I think if it's UW type science and business undergrad program that I'm familiar with, I think, yeah, we would certainly include that, no problem.
Okay, great, thank you. Our next question is another live question, and they're wondering what type of co-op placements do MSci students get when they go on co-op?
Yeah, we didn't bring a co-op student, unfortunately, here. So, but these days, most of them, I think, have some data analytics component. So they're very often doing, some kind of big data analysis, whether it's, processing data of various sorts, trying to form models of, based on data. A lot of it ends up being that sort of work. But there could be many other types of things, including industrial engineering type work, perhaps in planning and scheduling, could be information systems type applications, and could be all sorts of other business applications. So it's really quite a wide range, and also range in terms of kinds of organizations. So it could be anything from small startups to companies and public sector organizations. So quite a wide range.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Our next question has to do with research, specifically if there was anyone in the department looking into gender in the workplace or diversity in the workplace, specifically in the organizational behavior or human behavior scope.
That's my area. I'm not familiar with anyone doing exactly that topic at the moment. There is a listing on our website of faculty members, and each person has, some kind of a profile information there. So if you're interested to kind of just explore faculty, that's probably the place to start, is just look at everybody's research profile and you'll get a sense of the sorts of topics they're interested in. And as Alia mentioned earlier too, take a look at their research papers. You can easily find them on Google Scholar and you'll get a sense of the kind of work people are doing. And then, if you find someone who's interested in the topics that you're interested in, get in touch with them, send them an email, and try and start a conversation.
Okay, great, good advice. We have a question from a third-year undergraduate student who's looking to start their studies in fall 2022, and they're wondering how early you should start reaching out to professors as prospective supervisors.
I guess any time to start is fine. I would say the latest, if you're thinking about research degree, you need to for sure know before you actually apply whose interests align with yours. So it doesn't have to be during your third year perhaps, but certainly as you get started into fourth year, it'd be a good idea to start making contacts.
Okay, great. When is the earliest that prospective students will hear about admission decisions? So when do you guys start releasing your admission decisions for the various programs?
So coursework master's programs, the MMSC, we do them in two different ways. The online program we do every 4 months. So separate applications, separate admissions, each 4-month term. Lukasz could maybe comment on that exactly, the cycle there. After I'm done with the other programs. On the on-campus program, all the applicants come in at the end of February or at the beginning of February, and we start processing them right away, but we get quite a few applications. So usually it takes some time into the first, second week of March that we start making application decisions, and then students start hearing from there. Research programs are much more variable. If you're working with a specific individual and exactly, and that person has already more or less informally said, I'm interested to work with you, then the processing can be quite quickly. If we get an application and we know there's a professor who's interested to work with the person, that can happen very quickly. If you're just sort of applying without any knowledge of who you're going to work with, then it could take a while for professors to review the files. Whether there's funding available, these kinds of things can take some time. So it could be any time from beginning of February through till later in the spring.
Okay, great, thank you.
And maybe Lucas could maybe quickly comment on the MMSC online program about that.
Sure. So the online program accepts applications for January start, May start, or September start. And decisions typically go out, I would say, at least 2 months before the start. So for example, for our January 2021 applicants, we've made the decisions last week, I believe, or 2 weeks ago.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, so what are the different parameters for admitting or selecting PhD students? So what's the biggest factor in the selection, such as prior work experience, their previous grades, that kind of thing?
Well, I think probably all three of us faculty members maybe should comment on this one, because I think we might have all very different opinions on that. For myself, I certainly value someone's grades, but it's not the only thing. And usually I would want to know something about how the person thinks, and how they approach problems. And that tends to take some conversation, some discussion. So it's a combination of sort of how good their resume looks, how good their grades look, and some insight you might get from talking to the person about, what kind of a thinker they are as well. Sibel or Lucas, you have some comments on this?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Well, I agree with what you said. For my personal point of view, if I'm going to accept a PhD student, first of all, I look at the grades, of course, but also previous master's thesis. So I prefer to accept PhD students with a master's degree, even though we have this joint PhD program. And so what topic they have studied in their master's, have they have any publications from their master's thesis? I look into their CVs in detail. Previous work experience, I mean, it depends on what the work experience is. I don't seek that in particular, but it might be on a very relevant field that with a good field experience, that might be a plus for sure. And then we get in touch with the prospective student and arrange a teleconference call, Skype or Zoom these days, and try to get to know each other and see if we are a good fit, because it needs to be a fit on both sides. Thank you.
So, and I agree, and I'll add that the IES faculty members would additionally require strong programming skills in some language, such as Python or Java or C++.
Excellent, thank you. Rob, if a student were interested in booking a one-on-one meeting with someone to talk about the program in more depth, who would they contact for that?
Certainly can send me an email, no problem. Yeah,
Okay.
and they could also contact our two graduate administrators. We have Kimberly Dunn, who is the administrator for the MMSC programs, and we have Aaron Ackersvilla, who is the administrator at the moment for the MASC and PhD programs.
Okay, wonderful. And we will make those email addresses available to the students after this recording for sure.
Sure.
We have a next question is there a GRE or GMAT requirement for your PhD admission or any of your programs?
Yeah.
Really?
At the moment, no, we don't have it. Some years ago we did, and then we decided it wasn't giving us the information we thought it would, so we dropped it. Certainly some applicants do submit GREs and they give us some additional information, but it is not a requirement.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So could you talk a little bit about part-time studies for the research-based programs? So what kind of course scheduling is available for part-time students, if there is funding available for part-time students, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so for the research students specifically, we don't really do any special scheduling to accommodate part-timers who are working full-time. So it isn't really the easiest, frankly, thing to do. I would say most of our PhD students who come in, they'll either start full-time and then maybe switch to part-time after a while if that's what they really wanted to do. You know, if they wanted to work full-time while they're doing their PhD or master's. But we do have some, and they try to accommodate the best they can. But typically, it means that they have to, be living somewhere close enough to take courses and to be, fit into the university's schedule. So some courses are offered on an evening basis, but it really would be a minority. So the reality is that part-timers do have to somehow, get onto campus typically. Now, of course, with COVID teaching online, it's easier. So it's become more flexible that way, but I don't think this is going to last forever. Keeping the fingers crossed on that one. And, hopefully we'll be back to normal again fairly soon. MMSC students, the online program is fully part-time. So those courses are all kind of scheduled around assumption that the students are working full-time. So they'll often do things like have pre-recorded lectures, but then live classes even on weekends scheduled. So they kind of adapt quite a bit to the schedules of fully employed people.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is for our two grad student panelists. So maybe I'll ask Jordan to start and then Aaliyah to follow up. What advice do current students, such as yourself, have for those applying? What do you wish you knew before you would have applied? What do you think that you would recommend that students do when they're looking to apply to these programs?
Sure. I think the biggest thing for me, since I took quite an indirect route into my master's and am now doing the more traditional route, going to my prepping for my PhD, is to be aware really early on of all sorts of funding sources that may be available to you, and checking those deadlines, being prepped in advance, making sure you know you've got your references in line, all that sort of stuff, early enough, because a lot of these funding deadlines happen quite a bit in advance of the actual master's acceptance or PhD acceptance.
I guess like if you want to specialize in a technical specialty like operations research like myself, it's very important to try to polish your technical skills before you start your program. So we use programming. I personally use Python, and we also use specific software for optimization, but that maybe you could learn it there once you start. But I think like if you work on your technical skills, that would definitely give you a push early on in your PhD.
Wonderful. Thank you both very much. Our next question has to do with research again. And they're wondering, how do I pick my research project and how do I narrow down my area of research? Maybe you guys as students would like to speak to that, and Rob might want to add on after. You can tell us what your personal experiences were.
Sure, I could start. So yeah, so basically like you're not expected to pick the topic completely on your own. This will be like over a course of multiple meetings with your supervisor. So typically you would come up with an idea, and then you would go to the literature to assess if this is a good idea or not, and also talk with your supervisor to give you some direction on where else to explore. So I guess like it's typically a process. You wouldn't be expected to come up with a brilliant idea even before you start. So like I wouldn't worry too much about that. If you want to like prepare before you start your program, I guess my advice would be to read some of the papers that your prospective supervisors publish. These would give you probably the best preparation. But like once you start, the process of picking a topic will probably take a couple of terms. Yeah.
Thanks, Leah. I guess from my personal experience, I found my research topic while I was in industry. It was actually some of the gripes I had with the work I was doing there and what I wanted to see changed. But I think the big advice I'd give is that you might not have a particular research project or goal set out right at the very beginning when you're reaching out to your supervisors, or even when you start your degree, but kind of have an area about which you're quite passionate about, because it's still quite a large commitment. 2 years for a master's, 3 to 4 for a PhD, to be working in a field, and your research will evolve as you go through your degree, but you want to be sure you're interested in the field at the very minimum.
Okay, great. Thank you both very, very much. Rob, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I guess just in general, I could say a few things that professors vary a lot in how they, how programmatic their research is. So some professors, work very much within a specific area, and their students, they kind of, find students that are interested in that particular topic and form a kind of a program of research around a given topic. Others are much more interested in sort of exploring all sorts of different topics. So it's not just a function of the student's interest. It's kind of a, you have to find a nice happy medium between you and your supervisor. You want to find a topic that both of you are excited about and both of you enjoy working on, because you're going to be working together for a long time. If you're in a master's, it's going to be 2 years. If you're a PhD, it's about 4. So it's, it's a long-term relationship. And I guess the other thing to mention is that there are sometimes funding constraints. So professors who support a student out of their research grants, sometimes those grants have very specific outcomes that they're supposed to achieve. And so the funding is paid to perform a certain kind of research topic. And student could be brought in then to work on that. Now, it doesn't mean that that topic becomes your thesis. That topic could be something that you work on and your thesis is tangentially related to that. But of course, it's it's convenient and efficient. You could say if you're working on one problem as opposed to 2 during your as a student. But so there are these kinds of variations, both in funding and simply the way professors, like to do their work. So that plays some, have some role in these decisions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Our next live question is for our 3 faculty members, and it's, what advice do our professors have for applying students? So if you could give sort of your keystone advice to our prospective students, what would you tell them?
Anybody want to go first? I see mutes on Sybil and Lukasz. You don't want to answer this question?
I'll go first.
Go ahead, Lukasz.
Okay. And I think this has been said before, but I think it's important to stand out somehow. And there are many ways to stand out, right? One possible way to stand out is to be near the top or at the top of your graduating class in terms of your academic performance. Another way to stand out is to have some research experience from your undergraduate studies or master's studies when applying for a PhD. So research experience may mean a publication, either under review or already accepted. Another way to stand out could be to have some interesting internship experience, maybe working with, let's say, a very large real-life data set. So I think those are the sort of main ways in which one can stand out in terms of academics and research experience and accomplishments.
I fully agree what Lukasz said, but that was a good answer. But what I would like to add on to that is that we do receive a lot of emails, and maybe a couple of emails a day. So you do need to stand out. I mean, I used to answer all of those emails, but then I realized that I don't have time to. So you have to stand out in your email, in your CV somehow, so that we respond back to you. So why should we work together? And what are your skill set that makes you important for my research? I mean, then I'm telling this in general for all the professors.
Okay. The only thing I would add to that is maybe what not to do. So we do get a lot of emails, and a lot of them seem to indicate that the student knows absolutely nothing about the work that we do. So, it takes some effort to actually get to know a little bit about the professor you're sending an email to. And so if I get an email that says, oh, I've read your paper and I think you're really interesting, but then they go on to tell you something that indicates they actually haven't read my paper and they don't know what kind of work I even do, I'm more likely to ignore that one. And if a student actually knows something about the work I do and has some comments about that, then that may get my attention as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Our next question is surrounding how students and how the department is managing their students through the COVID-19 pandemic. So are the classes online? Are students expected to be on campus for research? Can you just talk a little bit about the student expectation for COVID-19, Rob?
Sure. By and large, most of all of our coursework has been online during the past spring term, this current fall term, and again over the coming winter term. We don't know yet what's going to happen next spring after May, but by and large, we're operating online. And because management science doesn't require, for most students, doesn't require a lot of physical labs. Some of our work does happen in physical labs, but most of it is not. Much of the research then as well is happening through remote connections. So certainly I meet with my graduate students through Zoom or other kinds of technologies like this all the time, and discussions happen that way. And most of the work that students are doing, if they require primarily computing resources, that can be done remotely as well. There have been certainly some disruptions for labs. So I do have some students who are working in physical labs with doing things like experiments with human subjects, and those have been basically bumped into the online world. And so we're trying to adapt and find ways of, adjusting our methodologies to collect data, through the available means that are permitted. Now the university is slowly opening up labs. Some of them have certainly opened up already this fall, and it's going to more and more will be opening up in the next few months, hopefully. But by and large, much of our work has been moved into the remote domain.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. One of our prospective applicants is asking if they can apply to both the MASC and the MMSC program.
Yeah, you can apply to both programs separately, and the admission process is done separately as well. If you don't know if you're interested in research or not, then that's certainly a viable option. In terms of the degree of competitiveness, we certainly have much more competitive admissions for the research programs than for our coursework programs. So it's definitely tougher to get into our research programs. A lot of that has to do with the funding limitations, but also we just get many applicants, far more applicants than we can accept for the research programs. And the MMSC, it's also, we get more applicants than we can accept, but it's not as, the ratio of applicants to admissions is not quite as high.
Okay, great. So in a similar sort of thread, what should students consider when they're weighing which program that they should apply to? What would drive someone more towards an MASC versus an MMSC or vice versa?
The main thing is research as a career interest. So if you have an interest in potentially pursuing a research career, whether it's in academia or or in other kinds of research organizations, then the standard path would be a research-based master's followed by a PhD. If you're interested to get a PhD, but you start off in the coursework master's, you may have a tough time transitioning because the coursework master's doesn't give you exposure to research directly, and certainly our PhD programs and most others want some evidence that you can do research before you're going to get into a PhD program. And the most obvious evidence is having completed a research-based master's degree. It's not the only evidence that's possible. We do sometimes admit students who don't have a research-based master's into our PhD, but they need some other strong evidence that they have good research abilities, good research potential.
Okay, great. And I think we have time for one last question. This is a live question. One of our prospective students is wondering what the average class size is for management science.
So it depends. We have in the coursework master's degree, we have 4 required courses, and those tend to be larger classes because every student comes in and takes these during the fall semester and one as well in the winter semester. So they would depend on the class size. Now, typically in the past few years, our admissions for the MMSC program have been around 80 to 90 students. This year, we've got lower numbers because of the COVID situation. We've had some students deferring, so they were offered admission, but they decided to defer till next year, so that they could hopefully things open up by then. But typically somewhere around 80 or so to 90 students in some of those core courses, and then quite a bit less in some of the other courses. So if it's a very popular course, it could still have over 50 students in it. But some of the smaller seminar courses, especially for research-oriented type seminar courses, they could be as low as less than 10 students in a kind of a discussion seminar type class.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Well, that wraps up our Ask Me Anything event for the Department of Management Sciences. If we didn't get to your question, you can always send your question directly to egso@uwaterloo.ca, and we'll be happy to answer it for you. Please make sure you visit uwaterloo.ca/engineering/future graduate students to stay up to date with upcoming events, admissions information, and resources to help you with your application to graduate studies at Waterloo. We welcome you to join us tomorrow for our other departmental Ask Me Anything events. We'll have different departments, different panelists, and information about our graduate programs. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to welcoming you to Waterloo Engineering Graduate Studies.